Hello, my fair friends. I'm Ruby Ruse, this is Baby Bunny, and welcome to Fairy Fortunes. Today I am continuing my series on the ABCs of Mythology, which is a 2019 video challenge. If you are participating in this challenge or any other 2019 video challenges, I would invite you to leave a link to your video in the comments below so that we can all learn about mythology or any other important topics for 2019. Today, we are continuing with E, and today E is for experience. Now, I know you're wondering, what does experience have to do with mythology? And my answer to that is, why, everything, of course. So once again, I do have notes with me today because I wanted to organize my thoughts. So if you see me looking down every now and again, that is what I'm looking at, is my notes here. So the first thing that I wanted to propose with E is for experience in mythology is that myth and the greater context of mythology, remember that the definition of mythology is a collection of myths. So what is a myth? A myth, if you remember from my first video, ABCs, A is for Arthur, which I will have linked below, of course, is that a myth is a traditional story that usually has something to do about origins and how things came to be. So a myth represents human experience, and that is why today E is for experience. So when we talk about ourselves, when we talk about not myth, but just our past, our present, and what we hope for the future, when we speak of ourselves, we don't necessarily tell a linear line of events. What we do when we are talking about ourselves, when we're trying to express our life stories, is that we are trying to show you our emotional reactions and our perceptions. So that is how we express ourselves. That is how we communicate to one another who we are. So it's not a story when you're talking about memory, when you're talking about human experience, it's not necessarily the most important thing, rather, is not necessarily the physical evidence. It's about the truth. So, and that's exactly what myth does, is a myth incorporates a certain truth. Sadly, in the modern context of the word, a myth is often associated with what's false. So if it's a myth, then we can dismiss it because it's false. But that's not what mythology really is supposed to represent. Mythology is an expression. It's about the experience. So these traditional stories of mythology are a way to capture those emotional reactions. They are a way to tell you that important truth in context. So mythology is associated with the meaning, not the physical evidence, but the meaning that we're supposed to embody, if you will. If you think about it, if we think about these great stories that have such meaning to us, if we look at the familiar stories of the Greek gods, or what's tangible right now in our modern culture, is the story of the god Thor. He's very much a part of our modern world right now. So it's about the meaning of that. It's not about the physical evidence. It's about what that means right now. So that's another question that we could ask. Why is the god Thor right now a living, evolving being that's a part of our culture right now? He's a part of our modern day experience. So we need to perhaps look at why that being, why that particular God has such resonance right now in this present age. There's a purpose and a meaning to that. And that's part of the human experience, is that meaning. When we tell our stories, when we're trying to communicate information, we're associating that experience with a meaning. And I feel that the reason for that is that the meaning is a mechanism for coping. We're trying to understand ourselves in the larger context of not just our own personal lives, but how we relate to other people and how we fit in, if you will, in the larger construct of the world. So there's a saying that is very common where people will often say that everything happens for a reason. Now, I really don't believe that everything happens for a reason, because you know what? Terrible things happen to really good people, and I don't think that there's a reason that that person had to suffer so tragically. However, I think that tragic experience can give us meaning. We can take that experience and we could put it and frame it in the context of a story so that we can understand ourselves better in this world and find a way to maneuver and share that experience so that it has context for others and can have a purpose. So I don't think everything happens for a reason, but I do think it's possible that every experience can have a purpose. And that's what mythology does, is it provides a purpose. So wouldn't it be interesting to propose the idea of a personal mythology? And in fact, I think that to some extent we all have our own mythology. We all have our own stories that we tell that help us give meaning to what happened to us, whether that happening was good or bad. And as I said, it's not necessarily the physical evidence. It's about taking elements of that experience, the truth of what happened, and framing it in the context of a personal myth. Not something that is false, but something that defines the emotional truth, that defines our own perceptions of what happened. Because it's very clear that in human experience, when two people see the same thing happen, they will both have two uniquely points of view of that same happening. They will have their own emotional reaction, and they will have their own perception of that event, and henceforth will have their own meaning of that experience. So I think that with myth, it's very easy to identify with the characters of the myth. We don't necessarily care about the fact that Thor has a magical hammer. We don't really care that Thor has the ability to fly. All we care about, really, is the adventure that he has to go through, how he has to connect with these other beings that are sharing his space. How does he interact with the monster Thor? How does he interact with his brother Loki? And how does he navigate the chaos of these two characters that he clearly cares a great deal about? That's why we resonate with the god Thor, is that we can see ourselves in those emotional reactions that we generate within our own as we experience Thor's story, as we experience his myths, as we experience the modern day telling of those myths in the Avenger movies. So identifying with a myth is often how a person can relate a story of their own path. And what's interesting about that is when we can understand the patterns of our path, when we can understand the patterns of the past, then we can more easily predict how we might move forward in the future. And the great thing is that we spend time reading not just ancient myths, but also thinking about our own personal myths, about developing our own personal mythology, is that if we can look at our own truths, as we can look at what meanings we've assigned to the stories of our own lives, then if we don't like the story that we're telling, we have the ability to change those patterns. We can assign a new meaning to those stories. So I think that experience is certainly an important part of mythology, because when you experience a myth, when it's ancient, it's helping you define and shape your present reality and helping you predict your future choices. So if you have a particular personal myth that you would like to share, I hope you will do so in the comments. And until next time, have a very full day.